you.
Oh.
There we are. Thank you, Vivian. You're like right on it. Awesome.
The director producer.
Yeah, I love it. So we're going to be section 7, if I'm not mistaken, unless anyone has any objections to that. But we're going to be section 7. It's going to be, if you're looking in the book, it's on 445. If you're going to be looking with me on the screen, have no fear, I'll pull it up in a moment. Where we're trying, the main thing that we're tackling, and God willing, good news, today we'll be finishing chapter 38 and hopefully getting into chapter 39, maybe taste it a little bit, get our feet wet. The main thing we know is that until this chapter, we were talking about the importance of action. The mitzvah that we perform is the action that is the primary of importance. Yet chapter 38 says you can't ignore the important component of kavanah. Kavanah means intention. Over here, actually, the word that we use in the English is attentiveness. And not only doing the action, but understanding and meditating on the depth of what we're doing. What we're going to be doing today is dividing 2 types of kavanah. A lower type of kavanah, which has more to do with our innate feeling, and a higher type of kavanah, which has to do with more cognitive meditation on our relationship with God. So we're going to see it inside. We're going to learn today's section 7. It's titled Levels of Action and Intent. So we're going to be going through 2 levels of action, 2 levels of intent, or kavanah is the Hebrew word, and seeing how they play out in our lives. So just one Hasidic thought before I start sharing the screen. I'm just reading on the bottom of 444 now, just to bring us up to speed. It says, of the 2 mitzvah components, which is deed, action, and kavanah, intention or attentiveness, kavanah acts as a superior matrix through which divine light can be revealed in this world. So, of course, action brings the divine light, but when you have the kavanah in the mitzvah, it's a superior fusion and a superior matrix for the divine light to enter this world, to have a fusion in this world. And that is why a mitzvah without kavanah lacks illumination like a body without a soul. So we see the primacy, the importance here of kavanah, which has been the theme of this chapter. So section 7, levels of action and intent. I apologize, it's been a couple of weeks since we were able to study, but we're back in, and let's hold on to each other and dig in. So 445, and I will share the screen now. Let's see where it went. Here it is. Okay, I hope everyone could see. Section 7, levels. It's going to be actually on the next page. Levels of action and intent. Above, we suggested that of the 4 categories, we learned that the world is divided into 4 kingdoms or categories. One is inactive objects, like minerals, rocks, water, things that don't have any life at all. Then we had the plant kingdom, animals, and humans. Everything in the world could be divided into those 4 categories. But what we did is, out of the 4 categories, we divided them into 2 general categories. The lower 2 non-movers, which were the lower 2 of the kingdoms of inactive objects and plants. Those correspond to the body, since they show no overt signs of life. And the upper 2 movers, animals and humans, correspond to the soul. Based on this distinction, the Tanya will now discern 2 levels in the physical act of the mitzvahs, the body, corresponding to inactive objects and plants, and 2 levels in kavanah, which is the soul of mitzvahs, corresponding to animals and humans. So just to summarize, I want to make sure we're on the same page here. We know there's 4 general kingdoms of everything in the world. Inactive objects, actually in Hebrew, it's known as domem, which means silent. They make no noise, they have no life, no breathing, nothing. Then you have 1 level up, which is the plant kingdom. They breathe, they grow, but they don't really have a deep level of life. It's a plant. It grows, and it can get cut off and die, but it doesn't really do much other than grow. And breathe. Then you have the animal kingdom, which have feelings, and then you have obviously the human kingdom, which in Hebrew is actually called midaber, which means the speaking type, because we have the gift of wisdom and the gift of speech, which is above any other kingdom. But now what we did is we took the bottom two of the four kingdoms, and we suggested that the two lower non-movers, which were the inactive objects and the plant kingdom, that's like the body, which is more the physical part, the lower level, has no signs of life on its own. And then we had the upper two, which was the animal and the human kingdom, and we said that's corresponding to the soul. So, but since it's two points to each of them, what we're saying is in the body, you have two levels, which means in the mitzvah performance of deed, you can have two levels. And then in the soul level, which we said was more related to the kavanah, the intention, which is more the spiritual, sublime part of us, also there you can have two components. So you have two components in the deed and the action of the mitzvah, and two components in the kavanah, the attentiveness and the focus, the meditation of the mitzvah. So right now, that's what we're going to be doing in this section, discovering two levels of kavanah and two levels of our deed of the mitzvah. All right, let's see that now inside. And the degree of illumination in the mitzvahs is also divided into four levels, two in the mitzvah act and two in the kavanah. For in the body of the mitzvahs themselves, there are two levels. So meaning in the body, in the action of the mitzvah, there's two levels, which are number one, corresponding to the category of inactive objects, the purely practical mitzvahs, which involve actual physical objects, and two, corresponding to the plant kingdom, the mitzvahs observed through the combination of speech and thought, such as Torah study, recital of the Shema, prayer, grace after meals, and other blessings, which, while having a physical component, speech, also have a more spiritual component, thought. Like plant, which while generally motionless, physical, still do show some show signs of life, spiritual. So we're connecting a bunch of levels, so it almost sounds Talmudic, but I just want to make sure that it's clear to all of us. In our action-based mitzvahs, he's dividing that now into two categories. Just like in the lower levels of the kingdoms, you have two parts, 2 points, which were the lower level, which was inactive objects that don't move at all, don't breathe at all. So that's more of a lower level. And he's connecting that level to more action-based mitzvahs that deal with physical objects. And of course, we have many mitzvahs that deal with our physical objects. Take, for example, the tefillin or the talit that we put on, that has a very physical component to it, that you're taking wool from an animal and you're utilizing it for the sake of a mitzvah. So that's a very material-based component of the mitzvah. That's the lower level. Then you have a more higher level, which is something that doesn't really have to do with physical objects around us. It has more to do with our speech, which involves our thought also, like a prayer. Prayer has speech in it, and it also has some thoughts that have to come together with a prayer in order for it to count, like we learned before. Or the blessing, the grace after meals. In Yiddish, we call it benching. When we do the blessing after the meal, you have to actually verbalize the words. And together with that verbalization comes certain thoughts. So that's still an action-based mitzvah, because you have to move your lips, as we learned before. So which means it's still involving breath in the world and involvement in the world. But it's still one up of a level of the lowest level of physical objects directly. And the kavanah of the mitzvahs, so now we're going to be going to the next two higher levels. You have the kavanah, which is the attentiveness, and we divided that into two categories, which is to connect to God. He's actually not dividing them yet, so we'll see that in a moment, which is like the soul of a mitzvah. When compared to the mitzvah act, its body. This kavanah is also subdivided into two levels, corresponding to the two types of soul found in physical bodies, namely the souls the souls found in 3 animals and 4 humans. So again, just the reason why there's a 3 and a 4 here is he's going through the 4 kingdoms, the 4 types of the categories in the world, which is the inanimate, inactive objects, the plant-based kingdom, the animal, and the humans. The animal and the humans, of course, have a higher level of soul than the two lower levels. So what he's saying now is that similar to the souls found in animals, and even higher up is the soul found in humans, those are two levels are going to be corresponding to two levels of our kavanah, our attentiveness and focus in the mitzvah. The Tanya will now describe levels 3 and 4 in more detail, beginning with the ideal human level of kavanah. So now he's actually going to go to the higher level of kavanah, and then he's going to downgrade to the lower level of kavanah. For if your mental disposition is good, to think about God, to contemplate his greatness, which means you have that ability in you that you're able to have a clear mind focus, and you could contemplate Hashem's, God's greatness, so that your powers of Bina, which we translated before as cognition, give rise to higher reverence. Which means when you contemplate in God, and you're able to have that cognition develop in you, that gives you a great awe, respect, and reverence for God. In Hebrew, it's known as Yira Ila'ah, which is the higher level of reverence that you have in your mind, and a love of God in your heart's right chamber, so that your soul thirsts for God to connect to him through observing Torah and mitzvahs, which pull the blessed infinite light down to illuminate your soul so as to connect with God and its mitzvah and its will. So to connect with God, and it's with this intention that you study Torah and you observe mitzvot. And it is with this intention that you pray and recite blessings. Then this level of kavanah could be compared to the highest of the four categories, which was human. So again, just to summarize, the highest level of kavanah is when you're able to contemplate on God's greatness in the world. And you develop from that meditation on God. It goes from your mind and it continues on to a feeling in your heart. And he specifically says on the right side of your heart, because if you remember, we learned before that, so to speak, the headquarters of the animal soul is in the left ventricle of your heart, in the left chamber of your heart, which is where the blood really pumps through. And that's really the place of passion and excitement, which was more related to the animal soul, pumping that to the rest of the body. But the right side is more related to the mind, that from the mind, it goes into the heart to develop this love for God based on your reverence that you have. So now you have this excitement and thirst to connect with God. So when you do a mitzvah and when you're studying Torah, you're bringing down that light of infinite light of God into the world. And that's how you recite a blessing, and that's how you pray. Now, we all know when you have that excitement that develops from this meditation, the clarity that meditation brings in your heart develops this incredible excitement that when you hold onto the mitzvah and the prayer, it's set in a whole different reverence. It's set in a whole different excitement. They say there's these great stories of scholars, rabbis that are so dedicated to the mitzvah, understanding the depth of what it's accomplishing, that sometimes they lose themselves in this world. They just a few of the famous stories said about different Hasidim. Well, I'll say a contemporary one, but first I'll start with an older one. The Alter Rebbe, which is the author of the Tanya himself, before he wrote the Tanya, and he was himself just a chassid of the previous Rebbe, it says there was a time that the Rebbe gave such an incredible teaching in the morning of Kabbalah that they were so ecstatic. They were dancing in the streets from this excitement, to the point where it came time to prayer, for the prayer to happen. But one of his colleagues was so enmeshed in the excitement of the ecstasy of the meditation that he was almost losing himself. Like his soul was like leaving its body from the excitement. And it says that the Rebbe ran to the store with bagel and spread some butter on it and stuffed it in his mouth to kind of bring him back to this world. Because a lot of times they would lose themselves. It says more of a contemporary story. I know the son of who this happened with. I feel somewhat connected. The son's name is Naftali Astulin, and he's a Chabad rabbi in LA. He actually deals with the Russian community, the Jewish Russian community of LA. And he's been working with them for years, and he has a very unique personality. He himself grew up in Russia, and he's a Chabad Chassid, and he has this way of really inspiring the Russians, and they come, and I remember as a yeshiva boy, I was very impressed. So his father spent years in Russia in the gulags in Siberia and hard labor for the crime of having a beard and for being religious. So his father's name was Zalman Leib. And when he finally, in the 70s, if I'm not mistaken, came over from Russia, and he was allowed out, which was itself an incredible accomplishment. And he was able to finally go to New York and meet the Rebbe. He was very frail. I think he had to have a leg amputated from the disregard of his health, the way he was treated in Russia. But when he came over to the Rebbe in New York, there was the opportunity to hold on to the Rebbe's lulav and etrog. We know that on Sukkot, we have the mitzvah to take the four types of plants, the etrog being the most expensive, put them together and shake them in all directions. So the Rebbe would allow Hasidim to utilize his own personal etrog and lulav to make the blessing. So there was a big line by the Rebbe's sukkah, and they would be able to hold on to the Rebbe's lulav and etrog and make the blessing. So when it came his turn, and he said the blessing, he was so emotional. All this time, finally being able to connect and do a mitzvah on the Rebbe's etrog, which he felt to be on such a holy level. He was saying the blessing, he closed his eyes, and he had such a meditation while he was saying the blessing, and with so much fervor that he actually dropped the etrog. And a lot of you know that a dropped etrog, chances are that it's not a kosher etrog anymore. If anyone watched the film, the Israeli film, I think it's called Ushpizin. I think it came out like 15 years ago or so. Lynn, did you watch that film, Ushpizin? Oh, you did. Okay, cool. So it's about, I don't know, I don't remember all the details, but
Can you repeat the title, Rabbi?
what did you say, Frida? Oh, the title of the film is called Ushpizin, which is an Aramaic word about the guests that come to our sukkah, the Kabbalistic guests that come to our sukkah. But Ushpizin is about Israeli guests that were not religious, that come to a religious person's sukkah. They were friends before he became religious, and they ended up wanting to make a nice salad, and they cut up his etrog. And right, Lynn, is that the story?
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's about being a Baal Teshuvah. It's one of my favorite films. My children would hide it because we'd watch it every Sukkot and have to order another one. I love it. I love it.
Really? That's funny. I didn't know that. Okay, cool. I know for my grandfather, every holiday of Passover, he would have to watch the Ten Commandments for the holiday of Passover to happen. Otherwise, it wasn't the holiday. So I guess Sukkot now, it's the Ushpizin film. Okay, cool. So my point was
How
that
do you spell Ushpizin?
Ushpizin, it's a Hebrew Aramaic word. I think in English it's Lynn, you wanna attempt? I think Lynn's typing it in the chat, so maybe she'll.
Thank you.
And there you go, the guest, Ushpizin. I think it's with an N, Ushpizin. I think it's with an N at the end, maybe. Whatever, either way, I'm sure you'll find it on Amazon. Amazon will do, definitely help you find it. There you go. So the point is that sometimes the meditation brings you to such a high level. So over here, what he's trying to say is the highest form of meditation is when it starts obviously with the recognition, the cognition of God and reverence of God. And from there, it develops into your heart. And the whole way you do a mitzvah is with an intensity of love and loyalty and reverence for God. That is the highest level of the mitzvah observance. By the way, I'm just going to pause here for a second, not so related to what we're sharing, but down in San Diego, it's funny, people ask, was that considered a vacation? And in truth, when I go elsewhere, it's actually I work harder because over there I'm asked to deliver the speech and to MC the wedding or whatever it is that's coming up. So this past Shabbos, and as Nancy so beautifully wrote a Dvar Torah for many of us that are on her email list for her weekly Dvar Torah, but we read about the splitting of the sea. And when it's read in synagogues, it's done with a beautiful song, which is hard to imagine this past Shabbat with the terrible news that came out of Texas. I don't think I haven't listened to enough interviews to know, what part of service they were up to, if they were reading that section of the Torah or not. But it's a beautiful reading where we read about the great miracle, the splitting of the sea, and it's done with a great song. So I just want to bring you back to 1944. I shared this as part of a bigger speech that I gave on Shabbos. But in 1944, which was obviously the height of the Holocaust, and there was a big Hasidic dynasty, not Chabad, but before the war, they were much bigger. Unfortunately, almost all of them got wiped out, and they had to almost like restart their Hasidic community, but they're known as Belzer Hasidim. If any of you are familiar with the famous Yiddish song, Bells, mein Shtetl, Bells, it's a famous Yiddish song about this shtetl called Belz, which a big Hasidic dynasty came. It was originally from Poland, but during the war, they had to flee to Hungary. And from Hungary, almost all of them were killed in 1944, but they were able to disguise their Rebbe and get him out. And from there, taking a ship, ending up in Istanbul, Turkey, and from there, continuing on to the Holy Land. In 1944, last week on the 9th of Shvat, in January 1944, their Rebbe, who was a holy, saintly rabbi and Rebbe, he made it to Israel. And it was 3 days later that they were reading in synagogue this celebration of song of the Jews splitting, the sea being split, and the Jews, the parting of the sea, and the Jews going through. So the reader of the Torah in that little synagogue in Jerusalem felt very uncomfortable to sing in front of this Rebbe that just lost his wife, all 10 of his children, and his entire Hasidic, all of his followers. They were almost all wiped out. So they felt very uncomfortable to sing. And so they turned to him, almost like trying to get an insight of what to do. And he instructed them to sing. And after they finished the reading and the singing, and then it came to the Kiddush, again, this was 4 days after he arrived to Israel from Europe, and he told them that the words of the song that we sing is Az Yashir. Az Yashir means then, which means at that point, Moses led the Jewish people in song, but the word Yashir is actually in the future tense, which grammatically doesn't really add up. It's then they sang, but yet in the Hebrew, the word Yashir, which is Az Yashir, means then they will sing this song. And it goes on to tell us what the song was. So the Belzer Rebbe, he pointed out what Rashi, the commentary, says, that this is actually the proof from the Torah that there will be the resurrection, a time when our loved ones will come back to this world, and that's really when we will sing. Because at that point, most Jews lost loved ones. When the sea was split, it says many of the Jewish people did not make it out of, or at the point they were called Hebrews, did not make it out of Egypt. In fact, it says 80% of the Jews didn't make it out. They actually died in Egypt. So for every family lost a loved one. So it was very hard for them to sing. It's almost like the song got stuck in their throat. They had the urge to sing. And yet over here, it was kind of swallowed up because it was bittersweet. So the Belzer Rebbe said, we sing now, knowing that the true miracle is still yet to come. That we will sing with the coming of Mashiach with all of our loved ones. That's how why he instructed them to sing. So the point over here is when a person is able to have that meditation and knowing that the song that we sing is true because our connection to God is clear and our reverence to God is at a height, the song is able to come out fully. And when it's able to be permeated in all parts of your soul, all parts of your body, that's the highest level of song that the Tanya is referring to here, the highest level of clarity, of attentiveness, of kavanah, where it totally takes you over. From the mind, it goes to your heart, and from the heart, it spreads to all ways of you doing the mitzvah, whether it's prayer or blessings or the Shema. It fully takes you over because you're in that state of reverence and love for God. So that's the highest level of attentiveness. Oh, and thank you, Shira. I'm glad you're able to join. Okay. Oh, and actually, someone on our class, her name is Shira, and Shira means song. So that's awesome that I brought that up. Ushpizin, there you go. Lynn, Sherry, you could see from Lynn's screen. That's her children didn't get a chance yet to hide it, but they have 9 months until, or 8 months until Sukkot. So
That's all right. I've got a spare and now I can stream it. So
that's right. Okay, so let's reshare.
Thank you.
Continue on. So we just finished is clarifying the highest level of kavanah, which is more related to the human out of the 4 kingdoms, the highest of the 4 kingdoms, which is the human. So we're all the way at the bottom of the screen on the last line, I think. Then this level of kavanah could be compared to the highest of the 4 categories, which is human. Since a human has intellect, which is free choice, and speaks intelligently, and you have engaged these higher, uniquely human faculties in your kavanah. So when you have that intellect that is engaged with these faculties, then you have that full kavanah. This is the ideal of level 4. But now we will turn to level 3, a lower level of kavanah, based on the discussions in Tanya chapter 16 and 25, corresponding to the instinctual properties of an animal. So we all know that an animal acts on instinct. It's not a bad thing. The instinct of a dog, I think often, is to actually protect their owner. But it's based on instinct. And the instinct could also be a detrimental thing to the animal, because based on instinct, if it feels like it's getting hurt, it's going to right away pounce back. But that's a lower degree where you're acting, they have the property of an animal, which is instinctual. But let's see how that refers to us, meaning we're obviously talking about the animal part of the person in our avodah, in our service. So let's see how that that speaks. And good morning, Ruvain. Glad you're able to join. Okay, so here we go. As for someone who, we're on the third paragraph from the top. As for someone who is weak in his ability to think about God and contemplate the greatness of the blessed infinite one, which is more like me and you, right? We don't have that clarity. We don't have that in-depth focus when we do a mitzvah. A lot of times it's more instinctual. So we don't have that greatness in our contemplation, and his powers of bina, which means the way the person thinks and has that cognition, won't give rise to a palpable love of God in his heart, which a lot of times we think about God, we think about the greatness of God in our life, in our world, but it doesn't automatically make us on fire and allow us to, quote, feel the burn. So we don't have that love in the heart so powerful, nor a reverence of God in his mind, nor a fear of God in his heart. And all he can do is recall and awaken the natural latent love in his heart and bring that love out of its hidden latent state, so that even if it can't inspire his heart to palpable emotion, it's at least conscious in his mind, so that the will of his mind and the hidden places of his heart are in full and absolute agreement with complete authenticity to actually give up his life to affirm God's unity, if put to the test. And this theoretical willingness to give up his life is seriously contemplated so as to have enthusiasm to attach to God his divine soul and its garments, so that they can be absorbed in God's unity and oneness. I'm just going to stop here. It's a long paragraph, but what we're trying to establish here, friends, is the lower level of kavanah, which is more relatable to me and you, which means it's not the higher level, that we have the full bina, cognition, which means we can elaborate and fully focus deeply on our relationship with God and on God's greatness, that develops in us reverence, a high level of reverence. And from there it develops love. But what happens if a person doesn't have that? But still there is this latent love that we naturally have for God, which means we are born with the love for God in our heart. So even if you can't develop a deep level of love, but this latent level of love that we have already is able to be awakened, we could bring it up, even if it can't inspire us to feel palpable in our love for God, but at least it's going to be appreciated in our mind. It's conscious somewhat that we know that if we're put to the test, we would be ready to do whatever it takes to remain connected to God. So it's a theory, even though right now he's not put to the test, but theoretically he would be willing. So he has that appreciation of God in his mind. And what he's saying here is that is enough of a kavanah to be attached to God. So let's see, he's in the middle of a sentence here, which is the divine will expressed through Torah study and mitzvah observance. As explained above, and as we have learned, within this latent love is also included fear. To accept God's authority, not to rebel against him, God forbid. So just one of my favorite stories I like sharing from a friend of ours who's a Chabad rabbi on campus in the University of Kansas. His name is Rabbi Tachtel. And I've shared the story a couple of years ago in our Tanya class, so it's good to bring it back up, where on Shabbos, after synagogue, Rabbi Tachtel would go to certain Jewish fraternities and really just try to schmooze with the Jewish guys that were there. A lot of them would sleep in on the weekends. So it was like 1 o'clock. Either they were hungover from the night before or whatever else was happening in their fraternity. But after synagogue, he would go with his talis, which he would pray with, and he would go through campus and just try to schmooze with them a little bit, to try to get a little bit of Jewish flavor and excitement in them. So he was with them on a Shabbos afternoon, and he spent a few hours with them. And when he left towards the end of Shabbos, he forgot his talis there, which many of you know, we actually don't wear a talis at night. We only wear a talis during the day. So since it was already sundown, when he left, he forgot his talis that he left in the camp, in the fraternity. The next day, there was a big anti-Israel, this was back in 2012 or 2013. There was a lot of rallies happening that were anti-Israel. It's not only then, it still happens now. But at this university particularly, there was a big hate for Israel, which was their way of masking their hate for Jews. But it was a safer way of saying anti-Israel. So there was a Goldstein who was not really connected with the rabbi. He was part of that fraternity, but he actually wasn't at all observant, religious. He didn't attend not only Shabbos morning, he didn't attend Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur. He was just a Jewish kid on campus. But when it came that Sunday, and there was that anti-Israel rally, it irked him. He needed to do something. So even though he probably only wore a talis once in his life by his bar mitzvah, he knows that the rabbi left his own talis at his fraternity yesterday. So he ran to his fraternity. He put on the Chabad rabbi's talis, which for those that are familiar, some people wear a talis like a scarf, like a little cute little handkerchief almost. But the Chabad rabbis, we wear a full talis that is, double the size of our body. And we roll it up and, it goes over everything. So this Goldstein, he put on this large talis. And even though he didn't know how to pray, he got up on some podium or some platform that was at this anti-Israel rally, and he put the Chabad rabbi talis over his head, over his face, and he just started swaying. He probably didn't know how to pray, but he just started shuckling back and forth. He right there needed to make a statement that I am Jewish and I'm going. And the next day on Monday, the newspaper of the student body, I don't know what it was called, or maybe it was a bigger Kansas newspaper, was a picture of him in a talis at this anti-Israel rally. The reason why I share the story is I can't guarantee you. I don't know if he was a tzaddik or a Beinani or what level this Goldstein boy was at, but I'm assuming that his level of kavanah was not so deep, which means he didn't have that bina, which we're translating here as cognition, of reverence of God that is palpable and felt deeply from his mind to his heart, and it didn't fully take over the way he was doing a mitzvah. But yet it was enough that theoretically, when it would come up a time that for him to remain connected to his Judaism, it came out strong. So at least in his mind, he was able to have that appreciation that I am a Jew and I am strong on this. it didn't come out vividly in a performance of mitzvah yesterday or the day before, but when it was needed, it was there. So subconsciously, he know that I am a proud Jew. And if the time would come that I would be questioned on that, I would strongly stand up for it. And as it came out that day on Sunday, when it had to come out. So that's someone that his level of kavanah is not as deep that it fully has this reverence and love, but it was at least somewhat of an appreciation in his mind of a love for God. It wasn't something that totally took him over, but theoretically, if the time would come that it would have to come out pronounced, it would be there. So that's a level of kavanah that he has an appreciation in his mind of the greatness of God, and that he is Jewish, and that he's ready to be connected with God no matter what. So let's just see if he continues. So, as you know, before I share the screen, so just to summarize, we're now focusing that there's just the basic idea in short is that there's two levels, two parts to the kavanah. There is a deeper level of kavanah, which he's comparing to the highest level of the kingdoms, which is the human kingdom, which is more intellectual, more deep, more soulful. That's what a human person has, his gift. But then there's also the more animal level of kingdom, which is a kavanah that is more instinctual, which means that by nature, I have a relationship with God. I have a greatness of God that I could appreciate. And if need be, I would be ready to express it. But for the most part, it's latent, it's dormant. So that's more of an instinctual relationship. That's like the animal kingdom. So that's a lower level of kavanah, which is what he's focusing on. And just to, I see Lynn is asking, what can we do and how can we stand with Dallas congregation in solidarity? You know what? It's actually a great question. I could tell you just locally, I love Novato. Lynn, I don't know when's the last time you were here, but we live in a very special county and city. Just in the past few days, you know, I came back on Monday from San Diego, and just at the front door of Chabad was this beautiful bouquet of flowers with a card from a family that I don't know who they are, a neighbor down the street from Chabad. Their last name is O. Smith. And they were saying that we stand together in solidarity with the entire Jewish community, and we love who you are, and we're praying for you. And then I got an email from a pastor. Her name is Sarah, or a priest at a local church here. And also, what can we do? And my response to her, like to a Christian community, was do an extra random act of kindness for a stranger and add light to the world. So Lynn, what could we do to support their community? The best I would be, I think I could actually find a contact to their community, is let them know that we're standing strong with them, not simply by praying for them, which, when we see on Facebook, my thoughts and prayers are with you. That's an important thing. But what we're learning in Tanya is that our thoughts and our prayer needs to affect our action, which is actually the entire point of this chapter, that the more deeper our thoughts are, the more divine light we're able to bring in through our action. So the action needs to be done, but we're able to draw forth a higher level of divine light with the thought and the meditation that we have. So, simply, it's almost the only answer would be, we're going to do an extra mitzvah, but the best part would be to let them know that the mitzvah is done, so that they are aware of the divine light that is being filled in. And I could actually, someone sent it to me. I have to find out. I haven't reached out to the Texas community yet. I can only imagine how overwhelmed and traumatic of an experience the entire community is feeling. For those who were there, that I think there was only a few people. One of them left earlier, and obviously for the part of the community that were not there. But I think it's letting them know that we're not only thinking of them and praying for them. We're going to do either an act of charity, which some of you are familiar, and I just shared this with a few people. Charity doesn't only mean financial contributions. In Hebrew, the word tzedakah, or Lynn as tzedek, would be justice. As the verse says, tzedek, tzedek tirdof, you shall pursue justice. Justice, I mean, when we do an act of charity, whether it's financial, monetary or not, it's an act of justice. It's the just and the right thing to do. And really, in every act of our kindness, it should be in a way of tzedakah. It should be in a way of empathy, compassion, and with doing it with doing the just and the right thing, the appropriate thing. And when we let them know that we're doing it, whether financial or just helping someone else, it's an incredible light that is being brought down to the world. And letting them know of it, I think, is appreciated by everyone.
If it's okay with you, Rabbi, if you could give us the contact information,
Yeah,
so
sure.
that we can write to them, or if we want to send them something, a check or whatever, so that we know the right place and the right way to do it, it would be appreciated.
Yeah, absolutely. Sure. That's a very good idea. Thank you. I don't think I'll be able to find it during the class. I don't want to waste anyone's time, so I won't put it in the chat, but I will text for whoever wants it. So Nancy and Lynn, I'll definitely send it over to you guys. Okay, let's continue. Okay, here we go. So we're now at the point of just back into the Tanya. We're studying the lower level of kavanah, which is more relatable to me and you, which means it's not a high level of an experience of clarity that it totally overtakes and is palpable in our love of God and in our reverence and respect for God. It's more of just an appreciation. It's a latent love that we appreciate the greatness of God. And if it needs to be translated, it would be there, that we won't rebel against God. But now it goes further, that when we have that with all this above kavanah, he turns away from evil and he does good, which is actually a quote from Psalms from David, where he says, Sur meira v'aseh tov, to study, pray, and recite blessings. But since he is unable to arouse emotion for God, he contemplates only the translation of the words without any palpable fear or love in his heart or mind. So when we study, not always do we understand the depth of the meaning of the words of prayer or of this blessing, but yet we're able to understand the basic meaning. So at least with that basic meaning, it's able to help us stand strong, that if a temptation comes our way, we feel, no, I'm higher than that. I'm stronger than that because of this relationship with God that I feel is strong in my heart. This level of intent can be compared to the soul of an animal that has no substantive intellect or free choice. And all its emotions, which are the fear of things it deems harmful and the love of things it deems enjoyable, are merely innate to it and not the result of its cognition or thought. So that is why what we're saying here is this level of kavanah is connected to the animal kingdom, because the animal kingdom, it doesn't really think deeply into what it's doing. It's just instinctive. This is something that tastes good. I want it. I'm going to run anything over to get it. Or this is something that I feel is harmful to me. I'm going to avoid it at all costs. It's more of an instinctive, it's just natural. It makes sense to me. And that is also in a relationship with God. When you see the relationship that I have with God, the greatness of God, it naturally makes you want to pray and appreciate what you're saying, or the mitzvah that you're doing, the study that you're studying. All of that is not a palpable love, but it's a love that's there. Similar to the instinctive relationship that the animal has. This is analogous to the natural latent love and fear in the heart of all Israel, which are an inheritance from our patriarchs, similar to a natural instinct of our souls, as mentioned above in chapters 18 and 19. So I do want to finish the chapter today, and God willing, we actually just did inside, which I'm really excited about. So I want to take some questions, but also just before, there's a few practical lessons that I'm going to read. I just want to see on the next page if here we go. Okay, cool. So I really want to read this page because the top half, this is more relatable, which means what it does is it tells us lessons, overview from the chapter. The last two is what we just studied today, but let's start from the beginning, and each paragraph is kind of going through the chapter with practical lessons. So here we go. A mitzvah without attentiveness, or kavanah, is like a body without a soul. That's a quote that the Alter Rebbe started the chapter with. Such a mitzvah is low in life energy, like the body, and not high in life energy, like the soul. So just an important thing we established, this we clarified at the beginning of the chapter, the way we understand a body without a soul is lifeless. It doesn't have any life. But spiritually, the body, it has a low level of life, just like everything in the world has an energy of God that's keeping it alive, like a table, like a beam, like a rock. It has a level of life energy, of God energy. It's just not high like a soul. So when you're doing a mitzvah without kavanah, you are bringing down some divine light. It's just not as deep as it could be. It's not soul, not on a soul level. When you involve the soul, the entire infinite light of God coming, infusing, and merging with the world is in an incomparably higher level. So I think that's what he's probably going to say next. The extent to which God's light shines into your mitzvah is immeasurably greater when the mitzvah is accompanied with attentiveness kavanah. When I do a mitzvah with kavanah, you can't measure that divine light that you're able to bring down into the world, in contrast to when you're doing a mitzvah without kavanah. Kavanah here refers to the general awareness that your mitzvah connects you with God by fulfilling his will. That's what kavanah is. That's a general level of kavanah, that by doing this mitzvah, I am connecting with God. To have kavanah when performing a mitzvah act is the divine will, just as the mitzvah act itself is the divine will. And finally, these last two, I think you're going to relate to more because it's based on what we studied today. Even without kavanah, the verbally performed mitzvahs, such as prayer and study, naturally have more divine light than mitzvahs which involve a tangible act. If you remember, we learned there's two components of the act of a mitzvah. One is doing something with a physical mitzvah like a talit, but the other one is doing something a little more spiritual, like a prayer. So there is some act, I have to move my lips, but it's a speech and a thought-based mitzvah, and that itself is a higher level. So that's like, instead of it being the inactive kingdom, which was a lower level of action of a mitzvah, then there's the plant-based kingdom, which has a little more life to it, which is the action-based mitzvah. So it doesn't have kavanah, but yet it has more divine light that is associated with it. And finally, if your kavanah is a product of your own cognitive contemplation about God, it will shine with more divine light than kavanah that comes from merely awakening the natural feelings for God in your soul. So on this last level, I'll let everyone just let that absorb into you, that last paragraph, and then we'll just explain it. So just to summarize the last part, there's two ways of the kavanah that we have. One is a kavanah that I work on based on my cognition, my chachma, my bina, my das, which is my inquiry, pondering God's greatness, and it leads to the cognition, elaborating it, and finally recognizing it and adapting it and personalizing it. When you have that level of contemplation, it's very personal and also very deep. And that leads to a palpable feeling. You're on fire in your observance of a mitzvah and in your reverence and respect for God. It's like similar to the person who was shaking so much when he shook the etrog that the etrog fell out of his hand, because he was on such a deep level of spiritual awareness, of kavanah. But then a lower level, so that's going to be similar to the human kingdom, which is the soul, the mindfulness. But then there's also a lower level of kavanah, which is more compared to the animal kingdom, which is more instinctive. It's still kavanah, but it's the kavanah that is developed based on the natural feeling of love of God that I already have, and you're just expressing it. It's usually expressed at a time of when your whole Judaism is being questioned, like that Goldstein on the platform. When I feel this adrenaline rush through my body, that no, I'm Jewish, and it didn't come through a deep level of understanding, but it's something that I have already naturally inside of me. So it's instinctive. So when you appreciate that I have this and this level of this, I do appreciate God's greatness. So you're doing a mitzvah with his kavanah, although it's not deep and developed from your own mind and from a stirring of emotions of your heart, but it's there nonetheless. And that is a kavanah that is the soul base of a mitzvah that brings more divine light. But of course, if you're able to tap into the higher level of kavanah, which is based on my work and meditation, that starts in the mind and develops in the heart, obviously the divine light is greater yet than the other level of kavanah. So that actually concludes a big chapter. I think it's one of the harder chapters of Tanya. So we took our time, but I'm glad we graduated that. And we'll now continuing on this theme of kavanah, God willing, next week on the power, what my kavanah accomplishes on high. So it's a really cool discussion. When I do a mitzvah and I do it with kavanah, what is happening on high through my performance of the mitzvah with that kavanah? And anyway, we'll continue that next week, God willing. Is there any questions before we continue or any thoughts that come up?